The housing market has been subject to much scrutiny for many years. Whether you're a homeowner looking to buy your first property or live in social housing, you'll want to understand how the Chancellor's announcements are going to affect you. Mr Osborne has stated that there would be a plan to try and make things fairer between buyers and overseas investors in UK property.
The change that's been introduced here is to try and close one of the tax loopholes that otherwise exists, where you don't have to pay capital gains tax on selling a second home, essentially, which would apply, obviously, if money's arriving from abroad. It's not their place of residence because they're abroad, so they pay the capital gains tax. And in theory, this should raise a fair bit of money and start to slow down the piling in of money from overseas that's going into domestic property here.
If you live in Britain and are a second homeowner, then you'll be affected too, as the Chancellor has made changes that will impact your tax obligation should you wish to sell your second property.
For UK residents, the change that has been introduced is a reduction in the exemption that they have for capital gains tax on selling a second home. So instead of being able to say the last 3 years is exempt from capital gains tax, it's now only the last 18 months when they look to sell that.
The Chancellor has stated that he has plans to regenerate rundown urban housing.
If the Chancellor was to build £1 billion worth of social housing, it would be of quite some considerable benefit to tenants. For example, those tenants who are moving from one social housing to another because they are looking to pursue a job will be given preferential treatment. So for them, it will be a great opportunity. Electorally, it's quite good because it reaches out to the working class vote, and so the Conservatives will be able to market themselves better to that sector of the public. But arguably, the idea that he could put through £1 billion of social housing could fall apart at the local planning committee process, because usually planning committees are loath to encourage more social housing. No one really wants it in their backyard.
Despite there being a shortage of jobs, employment has remained reasonably high during the recession. How's this possible? And what's the Chancellor put into place for working people?
Employment has remained pretty stable, even though we're in the midst of a recession. But the reason for that really is that employers just aren't giving their employees pay rises. They're also not really getting rid of their staff. But at the same time, arguably, they've also been increasing zero-hour contracts. So you can say that employment has remained stable, but work is all the more precarious. George Osborne has made one small improvement, however, and that's he's raised the lower threshold for tax to about £10,000. So it's an advantage of about £112 a year.
George Osborne has introduced some ways in which he feels he can help the unemployed, especially the young. However, can his proposed changes really help? Are they worthwhile?
George Osborne is trying to encourage the unemployed through, for example, making available apprenticeships. It's his big idea to encourage people back to work. Now, apprenticeships are great if they can encourage a greater skills base within Britain and get more people back to work. Arguably, the kind of people that get apprenticeships with FTSE 100 companies, for example, are those who've got parents who are relatively well educated themselves, who are quite socially connected themselves, and who feel confident about their own role within the workplace. So there's pros and cons to it, but arguably it's the middle class that will benefit from this the most, rather than those who need it.
The Chancellor has said that the welfare state is unaffordable, and in response he has decided that the overall welfare spend is to be capped. Those aged between 18 and 21 claiming benefits without basic maths or English will need to undertake training or lose their benefits, and those unemployed for more than 6 months will be forced to start a traineeship, take work experience or do community work placement or lose their entitlement. For anyone who's looked into setting up a business or indeed has started a business knows that costs can run high, especially if you need a shop front or premises, because these are subject to dreaded business taxes. Were there any sweeteners in the autumn statement for local businesses?
Small businesses will actually benefit from the autumn statement because the Chancellor has capped the rise in the rate of business tax at 2%. And he's also delayed, he's extended business rate relief until 2015.
In response to the changes for business, Matthew Sinclair, representing taxpayers, criticised Chancellor George Osborne's plan for Britain's economy, saying he needs to make bolder moves to benefit working people and small businesses.
In many areas, they haven't gone nearly as far as we think they needed to. Business rates, business property taxes, there was a big increase last year, and just capping the increase to 2%, as he announced today, isn't good enough. Instead of endless tinkering changes, we think they get better value by showing investors, showing businesses there are serious changes taking place, and giving that confidence to people that they can invest and get a better deal, and that they'll be able to make their businesses work. And I think that'll encourage people to stay in business, grow new businesses, and work, save and invest here in Britain.
With regards debt and the economy, George Osborne said the government's plans are working, but the job was not yet done. He said growth forecasts are doubled to 1.4% for this year. The underlying deficit has been revised down by the Office for Budget Responsibility to 6.8% this year. It also predicts a small cash surplus by 2018-19. Now, there's a lot of jargon and figures here which can be confusing. So in simple terms, what does this actually mean?
In everyday speak, what George Osborne is claiming is that growth, the rate at which the economy is growing, has picked up this year. So that means that he's getting more in taxes than was initially forecast back in March, which means that he is able to close the gap between what the government's spending over here and what they're getting in taxes over there. That gap can close more quickly. So the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is this supposedly independent body that George Osborne set up back in 2010, that's meant to monitor what the government's doing and kind of provide very official forecasts for how the economy is going to go. They are saying that if he carries on with these policies and this rate of growth, by 2018, the government will be spending less than it's getting in taxes. So they'll make a surplus. They'll be making almost like a profit relative to the amount they're getting in taxes.
2018 is quite some time off, so anything could happen in the interim. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see if the Chancellor can get the economy back on track, like he says. He's put forward his plans, his autumn statement, but what do our experts think about his overall efforts?
Arguably, I think George Osborne will feel his autumn statement has been pretty successful. Certainly, it reaches out to his core electoral base. Small businesses will feel the benefits from his measures on taxes, and also it reaches out to the more populist base within his party, for example, tackling benefits so-called scroungers. At the same time, average people, average pensioners within society may not necessarily feel there was too much in it for them.
This is the first time since Osborne was Chancellor he's able to report any kind of success at all. It's an extremely shaky success. It's a success based on a bit of growth coming back to the economy, but that growth is based on an increase in consumer borrowing and not an increase in real wages and real earnings for people. So it's a very, very shaky success.
Here are the key points of the autumn statement again in brief. Who were the losers? Who were the winners? Well, there were no real big winners, but there were some small gains to be made by some. Let's take a look. The over 60s will have a one-off chance to buy extra state pension. Pensioners will see an increase in their pensions by £2.95 per week. The basic personal allowance will increase to £10,000, meaning you earn more before tax is applied. Married couples and those in civil partnerships will be entitled to £1,000 a year tax-free allowance. For the year ending April 5th, 2015, the total ISA allowance will increase to £11,880. Bill payers will save £50 a year on their energy bills. The under-7s will get free school meals. Rail fares on regulated routes, including season tickets, will be kept level with inflation. The proposed increase in fuel duty has been cancelled. Now let's take a look at who stands to lose. Those in their 20s can expect to work till they're 70 years old. The total size of a pension pot that can be saved will reduce from 1.5 million to 1.25 million, and the amount that you can save a year and still receive tax relief will drop from £50,000 to £40,000. Tax will be harder to avoid for those inheriting. Families will pay an extra £3 billion inheritance by 2018. Foreign investors will have to pay capital gains tax on profit made on sales of UK residential property. Second homeowners and landlords will see relief scale back. Parents will not have the option of transferring child trust funds to junior ISAs, which means staying with poor saving rates. So there you have it, a breakdown of the key points of George Osborne's autumn statement. The Chancellor's made changes for the year to come and will all be affected to a lesser or greater extent. Of course, there will be further changes made in the 2014 budget, but for now we know how his decisions will impact on our finances for the foreseeable future.